Welcome to What the Heck, where we ask, how do you react when your security dashboard lights up because your newest defender is acting like an attacker? This is the Cybersecurity Confession Booth, where anonymous practitioners share real security incidents and our expert panel dissects what went wrong and how to prevent it. I'm Rayna Stamboliyska, CEO at our Strategy and a practitioner in residence at the Paris-based Center for Internet and Society. Today, you will discover how deepfakes, fabricated or stolen identities, and the tension between hiring speed and verification rigor created a perfect storm for insider infiltration. This episode is brought to you by Didar GCP and Predictive. Welcome to you both to this new confession in our cybersecurity confession booth. So today I have Didar and Sander with me. So thank you to all the listeners for being with us for another confession. And right before we hear from today's confessee, I would like to invite you to introduce yourselves in one sentence.
So I'm Didar Gelici. I recently started a new role at the post office. So I daylight as the head of corporate cybersecurity, and I moonlight as a meetup organizer in tech space.
Wonderful, and congrats on the new job. Sander, over to you. Tell us a little more about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Sander Almekinders. I'm one of the owners of Dolphin Publications. So I'm a journalist slash analyst. We publish the magazine or the online magazines TechZine and ICT magazine. TechZine is Dutch, ICT magazine is Dutch, but TechZine also has an English version of the website.
Wow, wonderful. Independent press from the Netherlands.
We're actually doing well as well, so we're growing, which is very hard these days.
Now that we know who is with us today, let's get to the confession. So here's to the beginning.
It started like any other day. We were dealing with some end-user security issues, and we had a problem with one of our authentication systems, which had been bugging the team and stopping them from working on the project. There were incessant alerts on the sign-in page, and then we got a call. The guy on the phone was pleasant enough. We went back and forth on the problem that our staff were having, and he suggested that we provide access to our system so he could fix the challenge we were having. Little did we know we had just opened up our systems to attack.
All right. Before we dive into this scenario, tell me, both of you, what's the most creative social engineering attempt you have encountered in your career, either firsthand or as a reporter or even as a potential victim?
Yeah, let us think. I think the recent retailer attacks has been I don't know if it's very creative, but it was very successful, and it's we're seeing more third party, fourth party getting socially engineered.
I think one of the things that may not necessarily be extremely creative, but also there's also lots of accidental social engineering, right? So you are actually looking for something. You are actually looking for a new, whatever it is, insurance policy or whatever, or bank, something with your bank. You are being called, so you are actually expecting a call, even though that call is not valid, right? But you are actually looking into this. So there's lots of accidental social engineering as well. I think that's also quite interesting, and it's very there's not a lot of attention on it, but it is real.
That actually reminds me of the deepfake situation that happened in that company. I can't remember which company it was, but they were joined to a Zoom meeting with their CFO and many other people they recognize, and they looked real, but they weren't. So it is crazy.
Creative indeed. So let's get back to our confessee. They seem to have a lot on their heart. So, Didar, this attack succeeded through a simple phone call to the security team, the very people who should know better. That's us. So What does this tell us about the human element in cybersecurity?
That we are still human. We're not. We don't have superpowers. We want to help people. We want to solve issues. And under pressure, we do make more mistakes.
And I think that's the thing, right? So a lot of these things happen because teams are under lots of pressure. They want to get stuff fixed, and especially if there's a lot of business people urging you to actually fix an authentication problem, like in this instance, then accepting advice or whatever it is from a phone call becomes very tempting. And that's human, like Didar says, right? And that's but I always have a bit of an issue with people calling people the weakest link and all that stuff. I don't like that, because I mean, potentially you're the strongest link because you can actually identify all these things, but then you need to understand when something is actually amiss, right? And that's the real problem, I think.
Yeah, it's passing the blame, right?
Yeah, no, and who's gaining from that, right? Nobody wins.
What, let's say, organizational dynamics consistently make security teams susceptible to phone-based attacks? Like, can you reflect on that? Of course, without disclosing confidential information, obviously, but from reporting, Sander, or from things that people have shared in meetups, right? Or from your experiences, Didar. What organizational dynamics do we systematically find in that sort of compromises?
So every company has some processes in place, but the culture defines how much those processes get followed. So I think that is the answer to your question from my side. It's the culture. If you see that the higher ups are not following the processes, then that impacts how you behave day to day.
I would say you have it, like Dieter said, you have processes in place with playbooks and all that stuff. When something happens and you want to fix something, I can't really imagine a phone call being part of the of fixing a problem, because it's very hard to do MFA or whatever kind of authentication on that phone call, right? So I even though phone calls sound, and that's the creative part of this breach, obviously, because phone calls sound very, very personal, very real, but they're not. And ideally, you'd have more eyes on that phone call, right? To actually say, look, is this actually the call that's going to help us or make our lives even worse? So I think there is an issue with standard processes in this company.
From attackers' perspective, that's probably part of the attack. They can isolate one person.
So something that triggered me, right, when hearing the confession, is that the team gets a polite phone request for privileged access, right? So what is this? If you had to name like a single technical control you would expect that could block that request, what would that be? And should it be non-negotiable, and why?
Well, I mean, handing out privileged access like it's nothing is obviously always the wrong thing to do. You need maybe to get the person that's actually calling you authenticating or some other means as well, or whatever it is, or you do something, or you ask somebody else to actually check whether this is valid, or you check, because I would imagine a company has lots of security suppliers and MSSPs and people in between and all those, so the channel partners and all those guys. There must be more eyes on this than only this sort of singling out one person. And I think, especially when it comes to privileged access, you should never give that out one-on-one. That's, I mean, for looking at it from a relative bystander perspective, at least.
So I have one question for both of you. Well, actually two, but let's go with the first one. So clearly there is a human mistake aspect here, right? Very obviously. So how do you discuss this? Didar, you with the team, and Sander, you in reporting, without turning, frontline staff into scapegoats, right? Because we spoke earlier about passing the blame and blaming the victims. Actually, there is a victim here, right? So how do you do that? Like, how do you approach this, well, quite delicate conversation or narrative?
Yeah, and no blame retrospective. Like what happened? How could have been? How could have been? We have done better. What could have been done better? What is the missing piece here? What made us do this and behave this way? And next time, how can we make sure it doesn't happen? It's the no blame part. I think is the most important
approach.
I think like every good answer, it should you start with it depends, right? Because you never know. Maybe the person giving privileged access is actually in on the game. You never know, right? Or what's the level? Yeah, that maybe be too cynical, but I mean, things happen, right?
It happens. Yeah.
And also, what's the position of the person actually giving privileged access to the person calling? Is that somebody in a leadership position? Is that somebody lower down I think not necessarily. I'm not saying that you should blame a person who's in a leadership position, but you have a different conversation with somebody like them than you would have with somebody who's just trying to get all the alerts out of the way during the day and just cranking out sort of solution after solution, mitigation after mitigation. I think there are different conversations to have. That's my point.
Apparently, teams can underestimate process familiarity and how it can be weaponized, right? So how do we, and this one is a tricky one, I realize that, how do we build skepticism into organizational culture without destroying the collaborative trust that makes, teams and businesses function?
Ideally, you would have many scenario exercises so that people get used to the proper processes. And when they hear something not right, they can identify it sooner. And if this is happening to another company, if you take that as a case study, do that scenario within your company, and it also prepares you a little bit better. But I do also know it is very difficult to find time from anyone to do these things.
No, it isn't. I mean, maybe not to get too philosophical here, but isn't skepticism part of trust anyway, right? I mean, part of trusting somebody is also maybe in the back of your mind thinking, is this really true? I mean, and that, yeah, I think it should always be part, and maybe that's also something that you should do in your hiring process, right? Look for people who actually have that mentality, that mindset, but not just accept anything or everything that they hear, but just also think, well, but could you please give me some more evidence? So if phoning in support is part of your process, which I wouldn't be a big fan of unless you have very dedicated red lines going out and all that stuff. If that's part of the process, then you should always say, look, that's fine. And if you have an issue and somebody calls you at the exact right moment, then do this, and that to actually verify. Maybe ask what's the I don't know, ask them the old weird questions about what was your primary school, or I don't care. I mean, ask them some. Oh yeah, because then you're actually being positively skeptical about people, and people understand why people do this, why this is part of the process. And I think that really helps in the verification authentication process.
Healthy amount of verification.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually the old chestnut about zero trust, right? So to trust but verify. That's always the basis of these things. But to the earlier point, it is very hard to actually do that when you're under the under the gun and really have to perform and really add a lot of your plate, because you tend to cut corners, right? So that's human.
That's very human, yeah. All right, so let's move to the second part to see how this story evolves, because from what I'm hearing, it didn't start well. I just hope it will end better than it started. So let's hear from the second part.
It wasn't an immediate attack. We thought we had fixed the problem, but a few hours later, we started to see ransomware installs springing up across our systems, targeting our critical applications that made us money. One by one, we saw systems go offline. We knew that we hadn't seen any vulnerabilities compromised. Our alerting and logging systems were pretty finely tuned for that, so we went back to our logs to find out what the heck was going on. We saw some weird activity with one of our remote monitoring and management tools. It's not something we normally use to access those critical applications, but it is a legit tool in our toolbox. So we figured that someone had got access and then used our own tool against us. Then we saw other activity with another RMM tool, one we don't normally use. That meant that they had access and were inside the network, hands on keyboard still. We all knew we were in serious trouble then.
So we've transitioned from the initial breach to the spread of ransomware. This is interesting because there are a few things that personally triggered me. So my understanding is that the team has multiple RMM agents. So RMM is remote monitoring and management, right? Like AnyDesk, for example. And this to me is a strong indicator of compromise, right? Especially since analysts frequently misclassify RMMs as software sprawl, right? And what is also interesting, at least from my experience, is that attackers increasingly chain two RMM products, right? One that already exists and another one that they install to hedge against eviction, right? So the confessor says we hadn't seen any vulnerabilities, exploited. However, ransomware was deployed successfully. What does this reveal about the security monitoring approaches that this team uses?
I find these things like saying we knew that we hadn't seen any vulnerabilities. That's true, because they hadn't seen it. But for some reason, they translate that into so that they're not there, which is obviously always the not seeing something doesn't mean it's not there, right?
Exists. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, they didn't have all the right tools in place apparently to actually see what happened.
Or it could be a 0 day, perhaps.
Could be.
Yeah.
I don't think it is, but
yeah, I don't think either. I'm more prone to, let's say, logging that ignores authorized tools, right? So because in that situation, you would be blind to living off the land techniques, which, I mean, I agree with you. It seems to be the case here.
And it is. I mean, obviously, nowadays, hacking is more logging in than anything else, right? So in that case, it's because somebody logged in with authentic credentials, apparently, and then you don't see it. So, but that's very advanced. Then you need to have very advanced monitoring and very advanced tooling. And then the second thing that I got out of this was that we use multiple RMM tools, which is to a certain extent that's normal, because you want to have redundancy and all that stuff. And lots of companies use too many tools, but that's also the problem, because from my experience, what I've seen is that a lot of companies use 5 tools for the same thing, but they use 10% of every tool for a specific, because they were bought project based. We need something. We want to buy that one then, or the MSSP advised it or whatever, and they're pushing it, and then you get lots of tools that cover a part of the problem. But they don't really overlap enough in the sense that you leave gaps. But that's what I got out of this when I hear people talk about we have multiple tools that are doing the same thing. Well, if you have one good tool that does everything, maybe that's always a better approach. Everything is is impossible, obviously. But,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, one tool that has too many features and does too many things is not great either. But I mean, to me, like having logs on authorized tools is, something that you should consider in general, especially if you know that you have at least two RMMs, since they give, control over the device from afar.
and
So,
especially now
yeah.
that brute force attacks aren't very popular anymore nowadays because of all of this, right? Because it's so easy to get authentication or verification or sort of credentials from wherever you're getting it, maybe from the dark web or maybe by social engineering. I don't care. So that's the sweet spot now. That's where you should defend against, and then logging authenticated things is sort of step one.
Right.
I would say.
So, Didar, back to you. Like, RMM software, it has legitimate uses. We use it. I mean, and in practice, how do you maintain operational RMM access while preventing it from becoming an attacker's beachhead in a way? I mean, in other words, what's the most challenging part about detecting this type of activity, and what works from your experience?
I think it's it is layered approach, but it's with the softwares for RMM might not be as easy to put the identity and access control on them, because we need better, as Sander was saying, the identity is more important than the RMM software itself, because once you're on that machine with admin privileges, you can do whatever you want.
And I'm also very curious what was the timeline from when they saw something weird happen to when they actually did something, because and what was the playbook in place actually? Because I think when you see weird activity, the first thing you need to do is just do something, and not and not look more for about an hour by the book, for example, and see. Oh well, we're gonna because every second counts, right? That's the old saying goes, in these instances as well.
My impression, which may be mistaken, is that it's all in the same day, or at least over the course of 24 hours or so. Like it sounds quite swift, right? Which to me sounds like rapid ransomware rollout on an AD-based distribution, and automated scripts.
Yeah, just obviously we don't know which company it is and how big it is, but this is also something. I mean, apparently they're doing everything themselves. That's what I'm getting out,
Me
right?
too.
Which is,
Yeah.
to a certain extent, I understand that, but it is also more common and more accepted nowadays to use more managed services as well. Obviously, it depends on how much do you want to outsource to those kinds of services. But apparently they don't use this, and I think, especially given the level of attacks and the level of threats nowadays in the landscape, doing everything yourself, I think, is for many companies. Obviously, if this is a small company that doesn't have the funding or whatever, actually do it, that's a different story. But if they can, I would always look into maybe having some outside monitoring as well, and to do some. So not necessarily build your own SOC, because hardly anyone can do that. But there are some very good and very affordable, to a certain extent, managed services in the market as well, right?
Right. And in the EU, we now have a regulation for MSSPs. So thankfully, we'll see some increase in quality of the services provided, especially to smaller actors, which don't necessarily have the means, the resources, etc., to deploy managed SOCs or whatever. let's hear for the third and final part, like the resolution in a way, like what happened. And then we'll talk about extracting repeatable practices more and further. So let's hear for the third part.
This attack knocked multiple systems offline. We had to report to the board, to our national security organisation, and we had compliance reports to file. At the same time, we were trying to get those systems back online from backups, and also debate whether to pay the ransom or not. In the end, the business caved in and paid. They did get a discount on the original demand, but let's just say a lot of money changed hands. And none of us got bonuses that year. We were lucky none of us got fired, to tell the truth. It came down to a social engineering attack on the security team. They appeared to be following our internal processes, and that led to some suspicion that one of us was involved, leaking data to them. But then we saw other companies hit in the same way. It wasn't just us, but that was not much comfort. We tell our employees all the time to look out for these attacks, but we got hit, and the results was even worse.
All right. That's, I should acknowledge this is a very difficult thing to listen to. I don't know about you, but I'm like really feeling for these people. I mean, you know, other than things escalated quickly to payment, let's discuss how we can do better. So, from what I hear, the business decision to pay ransom is one thing that is that sticks with me here, and the other one is the suspicion of internal collusion, let's say insider threat in a way. So, Didar, the testimonial mentions, this team suspicion brief, fortunately. So they discovered then that similar attacks exist elsewhere. What changes, technical, procedural, whatever, would you implement to distinguish between compromised insider activity and in external attacks that use legitimate credentials? And the tricky part is, how do you do that while maintaining transparent communication with the team about the investigation process, right? Because such suspicion is very susceptible of destroying team morale, So how would you approach this?
I would not even come up with that as a conclusion, firstly, because it might not be an insider threat. The social engineering attacks could have happened many, many times over a period of time that the attackers got to learn about your internal processes by social engineering your staff. So it doesn't have to be an insider necessarily. So by going with that, I think, that destroys the morale. But obviously that it should be investigated in the background. So that's the first part. But that also conflicts with what we what we've seen in this scenario, because the attackers, once they got access, in a few hours period, they started their attack. So that also tells me there might not be an advanced persistent threat actor, because those ones usually like to stay in, make themselves comfortable, get whatever they can before crippling the organization. So, so there are some, I would not go with it was an insider directly without knowing for sure.
Especially nowadays, right? Because everybody gets hit by ransomware all the time. So it's not like you're unique. So I think it's a bit of a weird first thought.
My guess is that it comes from, because this is a legitimate case that happened to people, right? And so my guess is they were suspicious because in the beginning they said the attacker knew like the jargon, the words they use and their processes. They followed the processes, which
That may point towards, maybe contrary to what Didar says, that may point towards somebody who's been in the environment longer, because then they could know.
Would be.
Okay. So Sander, I have another question for you. So we heard management caved, paid the ransom. How do you report on the human costs, financial and emotional, toll that on the security teams, when you hear or suspect that an organization has caved in and paid? How do you do that?
Well, I always there are some people that are very adamant and say, look, you should never pay, and there are even people that say we should make it illegal to pay. So that they want to draw up legislation to actually make it a crime if you pay, because obviously the narrative is you keep the system alive by paying, and I, to a certain extent, from a theoretical standpoint, I get that, but in practice, I've actually interviewed people who were hit by ransomware anonymously, obviously, because nobody wants to admit it in public. But they said, look, if and that was a multinational company that really relied on orders coming into their CRM, ERP, all that stuff. And he literally said, look, if we don't get orders for a week, we're done. So it's very nice when you work for a security provider to say, look, it should be illegal to pay, and blah, blah, blah. Nobody should pay. But if the life, and this was a multinational company with about 5,000 people, I know, working for them. If the lives of 5,000 people depend on whether your company exists or not, that's a completely different decision you need to make, and that's a human decision. That's not a judicial kind of thing that you're doing, right? And I think that's so overlooked that a lot of companies, of course, some companies that pay shouldn't be allowed to pay, or should maybe to a certain extent. And if you learn from it and you have your backups in order better or whatever, and then maybe you don't have to pay the next time, I think it's very easy to blame, because then you're actually victim blaming, right? So, and I think that's always the wrong approach. So. To your question, how do you report on this? I understand it why businesses actually pay. It depends on the reason why, right? If it's an old-fashioned ransomware attack, which is only backups, which you can resolve by having good backups, right? Then I don't understand why you would pay, because you actually could get your backups in order. Should have had your backups in order, and you don't have to pay. But nowadays you get into this double, triple, quadruple extortion, and they will leak your data anyway. What do you do then? I mean, it's a very human thing to be considerate of companies that actually pay. Question.
Well, I mean, my answer to that question would have been, it depends, if I wanted to make it concise. But basically, yeah, it boils down to you can't know what's happening in an organization from the outside. So just blanket blaming everything, and prohibiting things is a very difficult decision to take.
Yeah, and I also wonder what he meant by saying we were lucky none of us got fired, to tell the truth. Whether that was because of somebody got the blame and nobody got the blame and then got fired, or they paid so much money that they actually had to fire people to actually. But that's more of a sort of academic thing that I have with with this.
Well, they didn't get bonuses apparently, which is tells things also about how incentivizing security is seen within that organization. But that would be too much speculation on my end of getting into that. But Didar, looking beyond this incident, let's say you are building measurement frameworks for the board right? Which metrics would best demonstrate that the organization has learned things from a breach caused by social engineering and has improved its, let's say, human-centric defenses? What metrics would you put there?
Very tough. I really don't know. It will probably take a couple years just to get back proper strengthen your defenses, and then you'll have a bit more data to build proper metrics around what to show. And around people, well, everybody does phishing simulations and stuff, but really, is that gonna, in this situation, I don't think that is the answer. It is very tough.
I do have to say, based on the final piece of what the person said, it, to me, as somebody listening to this for the first time and reading it, it doesn't look like they have a very good clue of what they're doing. Maybe that's a bit too harsh, but I mean, you always start with a harsh statement and then you make it a bit more mellow, right? That's always because the final piece of what he said to me, that sounds like, well, at the end of the day, it's your turn, and then if it's your turn, it happens. Because I don't really, and that's what I missed from this excerpt. Maybe there's more, and we're not going to listen to that. But what exactly are they going to do to make this not happen again? Because the end of it, the end of it was we tell our employees all the time to look out for these attacks. Yeah, well, very nice, but we got suckered, and the result was even worse. That's the wrong attitude, in my opinion. I mean, I understand why he would say that, because obviously he's also sort of passing the blame a little bit because he doesn't want to be responsible to a certain extent, and it is what happens, but it is a bit too passive and a bit too defeatist. I think that approach to so that conclusion to this story that he's telling. That's what when I'm reporting on stuff like this. That's a response I usually don't like very much.
Do you challenge it?
Yes, I do, but
Yeah.
obviously they never respond because it's just it is very tempting to say, look, when it's your turn, it's your turn. But I would never in crisis communication, I would never sort of tell that to anybody else. You need to be more active and need to think about things more. What did we do wrong? Where did we go wrong? And that's not what I'm getting from these three pieces of audio. There was somebody sitting there looking, well, it was very bad, and we paid a lot of money, and but
It's a difficult thing to listen to from a human perspective.
Yeah.
But I'm hearing a lot of unsaid things about that the company culture is not enticing towards, change, organizational transformation, and learning from mistakes yet.
Yeah, that's what I got as well. So.
Let's try and help them with the wrap-up question I have. So I have one for each of you. So Didar, starting with you. You are the new CISO post-incident in this organization. You walk in tomorrow. So can you name in one sentence the first control you would deploy, the first process that you would rewrite, and let's be very generous here, the first metric that you would present to the board to account for the need for change, for organizational evolution?
It is not one control, but I would aim for securing by default so that the technology helps more in these kind of situations where the human defenses are failing, which we should accept that it's going to happen. We're human. We're not going to be perfect. That's why I think technology can help there to make sure that even when there is a human error, it can be picked up by the technology and it's, fixed. No, it doesn't allow things to go really badly wrong. So I will go for secure by default as a strategy. And the first control will depend on what is already there and what is not. We do not have enough context to tell. And the metrics, again, it is very tough.
So if a security team recognizes themselves in this story, they've gone through the same thing, they have a similar reluctance to change, organizationally speaking, what's the first conversation they need to have on their next team meeting?
I think, first of all, acknowledging we cannot change the past. What happened has happened. Let's look to the future, forward looking. What can we do now? What needs to change? So that takes the pressure and the guilt off of the people's shoulders. So that opens up a lot of more space for them to think more logically, reasonably, make better decisions rather than sitting in that guilt and I've done something wrong. We were all bad. It's like, no, let's put the past to past, focus on the future.
Sander?
To try and grasp the concept of risk inside of your organization and try and sit down with you, look, what do we have? I mean, and that's all very, very standard, right? So do an assessment of how many tools do you have? Or can we maybe consolidate some tools to actually make the gaps small? And that's a technical thing, right? To make the gaps smaller between all the tooling. And I know that's very hard because there's lots of legacy and some tools don't work with this and some tools don't work with that. And now everybody's doing cloud native stuff again as well. And then it's getting even worse. But even having the conversation and concluding that, look, we can consolidate a little bit, but not that much, I think is more than a lot of companies know now about their estate in general. So I think that having the discussion itself already helps. I'm not a big fan of security awareness training and all that stuff, but some of it actually works if it's very highly specific to the company. Then it can work, but I don't think we should necessarily go in that direction because, as this guy is telling us, we tell our employees all the time to look out for these attacks. Yeah, well, but what does it mean to actually look out for an attack like that, right? Nobody really knows. So and from I think from a human standpoint, from a trust standpoint, I think it's important to have people, like I said before, have people understand what it means to be a security professional, to be on a security team, and on the other hand, what it means for a business user to not have access to a specific tool or whatever for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour. I think that really helps to also get, because like I said, at the end of the day, it's a risk assessment that you're doing. You need to actually accept some risk. Otherwise, you're not going to be 100%, right? So otherwise, you're not. You need to understand what that risk is, and to be able to understand that, you need to talk to people.
Right.
So.
All right. Thank you both for sharing so many insights so candidly. Also, so I hope that our confessi, thanks to your guidance and a healthy dose of humility, can walk away lighter, but also armed with lessons rather than blame. So, yeah, let's keep on learning and improving together and keeping our guard up without losing the human touch. Thank you to both of you, and I'll see you next time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Sysdig GCP and Predictive. And that's another confession processed in our cybersecurity confession booth. Grab your companion resources from the show notes and share this episode with your security team, as this could happen to you too. Subscribe to What the Hack for more anonymous incidents that help you learn from security failures.